Happy New Year to you all, and thank you as always for tuning in and having a look. We're getting on to showing a little bit more about how Deneb v2 is coming along. So in the last session, we did a very quick look at the UI. It was more about setting expectations. And as promised today, now I've got a bit more time available, we'll actually take a look at how properties are going to change in version 2. In version 1, we had a few settings exposed in the UI. And we had some in the properties menu, actually, in the visualization pane. But they weren't obvious because I think people were focused on the main UI. So I have version 1 in front of me again here. I guess the key thing is that, before we had the specification and config panes where the editors were, we also had the settings pane, which is where we added some options for choosing the provider, whether it's Vega or Vega, whether to render in Canvas or SVG, and then also the interactivity settings. So that's things like the tooltips, the context menu, the cross-filtering behavior, that sort of thing. Over in the format pane, we had a few options for the editor behavior. So we could actually swap position around, we could change the font size, that kind of thing. We had a couple of options for data limit and various other things, but they weren't too discoverable. So people might have known they were there if they read the documentation, but they were easy to skip over. So the goal with version 2 is to, where we can, bring more properties into the main UI, make them part of the workflow so that it's a bit easier to find them, but it's also easier to use them. I'll just hop over to V2 and we can get cracking and start having a look. Here's the interface we saw at the end of the last video, just very quickly. So this is how version 2 is going to look, and we know we have more buttons in there. As a developer, I have APIs provided by Microsoft which let me control the setting of properties in the pane, but not all of them are really sensible to do so. Things like conditional formatting, where we're assigning measures to property values, those kind of things, they're not remote controllable per se. We can read them easily enough, but they don't have ways for us to trigger them, so they may stay in the pane. We don't have any of those yet, but we may do a bit further down when some new features come in. But it's more about moving the ones in that make sense. What we'll do is we'll start with the ones we saw last time. Notice that we have our specification and a config panes here, but our settings pane is now gone. So the idea is to have broken that out into more targeted behaviors. So along the menu here, we have the first one would be the interactivity settings. So we can click on that, and we have an on-object little pop-up that lets us choose our integration behaviors that we want with the main window. So these haven't changed yet. There will hopefully be a couple more options going in just to give us a bit more control. But we can see that we have the tooltip handler visible, and I can hover over one of my data points in the background and I get my contextual tooltip come up. If I turn this off, because I'm asking Vega to use tooltips, this will now default to the Vega tooltip handler. So this is just a fairly standard tooltip, but this is what Vega provides. My data points in my context menu, I can turn that off. And when I click on my bar, I now don't have the ability to do any of the data point specific things. I still get a context menu, but none of the specific options. So I can re-enable that and click on the data point again, and I get my include, exclude, and drill through options because I have a drill through page. So I have my cross highlight values. I can turn those on or off. So that's a more sophisticated interactivity option, and cross filtering as well. So that's the ability to click on a data point and have it filter other visuals. I could turn that one off. We may have seen the data points for the selected column disappear out of the debug pane. That's still undergoing a bit of work, so I wouldn't focus on that too much. I can now click on these data points and they don't do anything because I've turned that off. So first menu is just about abstracting and segregating those Power BI specific options. The next menu on the pane here is the Vega output. So these were the options we saw in version 1 where we can change the render mode from SVG to Canvas. So we don't see too much going on here, but this Canvas renderer is a little faster but doesn't scale so well. And then the ability to change the provider from Vega Lite to Vega. So in my editor right now, I've got a Vega Lite spec, but if I wanted to change on the fly, I would change this here. But to be honest, you may just do what you normally do, and that's create a new template and start again. When we're on the report viewer, our visual has a certain set of dimensions, and we can't resize that in Deneb, but we can see what it looks like. Our preview area is the area with the dotted lines around it. That's the size of the visual as per the report canvas. We had a couple options in the properties menus in Power BI before, but now we're bringing those in with some new ones. So the primary one we had before was to show the viewport marker. So that's the dotted line around where the visual is. I think it's sensible to keep it on, but some people may want it off for detail work or other reasons. So that's the first property we've moved in from there. The first ones we've introduced that are new, we've got this one called apply background setting to preview area. So what that's doing there is, one of the things we don't have as developers is access to you might have a different background color on your visual. It's just not something that Microsoft make available. And generally, as a rule, anything that's underneath if we go into the properties menu here under the formatting pane, anything that's under general, it applies to the custom visual container, not the visual inside it. So anything under that menu, all of these properties here, we don't have direct access to those because they apply to the actual container and Microsoft governs those. So if I change my background color to, say, this blue here, which is quite delightful for the visual we're looking at, but it will serve the purpose of what we're showing, this property will bring that color through so we can see it. Now, if I turn this off, then it brings through the user interface color, this white color that's in the background. So this lets me either turn on or off as needed. The second option we have, and I'll just turn that color back, sorry. The second new option is this show scroll bars on overflow. So what I mean by that is, in version 1, if we were to do something that made our visual overflow the container. So what I'm doing here is I'm introducing a step height for our bars. And what that will do is that will make them 40 pixels each. And what that's done is it's increased the height of the bars. But we can now see from the dotted line that our visual goes outside the container. The default behavior in version 1 and in version 2 is to show that overflow so that you can work out how the visual is going to look. And we can see that it pops over the container. But what we can do with this property here is, if we want to see how it will behave on the canvas, we can now click on that and we can see that the scroll bars are introduced, so we can see how the visual will behave. By default, that's as it was, but you have control over the ability to do that. So we'll leave that extended because that will serve our purpose for further demonstration later on. So I'll leave this the size it is currently. We have the ability to toggle the pane position. This was something that was in the menu before, but it wasn't easily discoverable. So you can actually click this and it will place the pane on the right hand side. So if you prefer your JSON over on the right, this is an option that is there, but has just been promoted into the main UI. So you just have an easier way of finding it. So I can turn that however I like. And then the last one that we haven't talked about, but will now, is the toggle of theme. So right now we just have a standard white theme. If we click this, we get dark mode. So our editor is dark, our menu is dark, our debugging area is dark, our color scheme has changed. But what's happened is our visual preview area has remained white, and it's all to do with that background color. So going back to that setting in the preview area, if I want my whole visual to be dark, I can just turn that off. And it's really just about making sure that we can represent your visual how it should be shown on the canvas. So that's on by default, but you can turn it off if you want to work in a fully dark screen, if that's your preference. So I'll just turn that back for now. And we're back to normal. So these are the new exposed properties along the top of the page. And the last menu we'll talk about today is the text options for the JSON editor. So we're going to talk about the JSON editor in another session, but just to round out the on-surface properties, the discoverability of them. In our editor in the bottom right here, we've got this little cog that we can click on. And what that will do is that will expose some of the properties that we had in the visualizations formatting pane in version 1. So we can easily change our font size from here if we so wish, which will certainly help with demoing and for those that need larger sizes. We can also change our tab size. So what we mean by that is how many spaces are being used before we indent. So here we're using a tab size of 2, but we can easily change that to say 4. And we don't see that change just because we don't manipulate the text. But if I were to click the format option, then we see we get that much bigger tab size. So that's just something that allows us, if we wish to use that. I think 2 works quite nicely personally, and that's the same default as in version 1. But the options are there if you want it. We also have the ability to turn on text wrapping, which is on by default. That means when our line of text hits the end of the line, the end of the pane, does it overflow or does it wrap around? At the minute it wraps around, so we can see everything in our editor. We've got the option to show and hide the gutter. That's the area on the left with the line numbers in, so I can turn that off and hide that away if I don't want it. But similarly, we can control whether we show the line numbers or not, so we can just have our code folding. And there's also an option for autocomplete, which will show in the JSON editor specific video. It's a bit hard to show out of context, but for those that are familiar with how the current editor does auto-completion, that will make a bit more sense. But we'll spend some time on that in a video later on. So those are the settings that are on surface within the editor now. But if we go into the actual menu, what we've done as well is, because they have just become available to custom visual developers, we've actually added in the new formatting cards for the properties pane. So we can see here under advanced editor, we've got it broken up into interface, and we can change our theme here from light to dark as well. And this will be in sync with the user interface. We've got our preview area settings and our JSON editor settings. So all of these settings are in the UI, but they're also in the menu if you prefer to work that way. We have the report theme integration, which is to do with color scales. That's a V1 feature. We haven't really changed anything there. And two of the options that we've kept out. The first one is the same as version 1. We have the data limit options, and this is for overriding the 10,000 row limit that we impose on default visuals. So we can actually try and fetch as many as Power BI will let us, and that's off by default for performance reasons. And it's really a judicious thing by you as a user. So that's remaining in the menu for now. The other one is this new menu that I've included called rendered visual, and this is all about the output. So whilst we had the ability to look at how a visual appears using the preview area settings, and we had this option about showing the scroll bars, I'm leaving the specification with that extra space just so that you can see what I'm going to demo with that menu as well. So if I jump back to my report, I can see I now have my scroll bars. So my visual does scroll. This menu has the ability for us to configure the scroll bars a little bit. This was a feature that was requested by a user, and all we're currently doing is allowing the color, the opacity, and the border radius. So what I mean by that is right now we have a black scroll bar with 20% opacity, so it looks like a kind of gray color, but I can ramp up that opacity to 100% and I get a black scroll bar. Similarly, I can change my color to something else. So there are people that were producing reports for different background themes that wanted a bit more control. So hopefully this will provide that. And there's also the ability to just adjust the border radius to give yourself rounded corners. So I think we used rounded corners in V1 by default, but V2, all scroll bars within the interface and visuals have this kind of flat square edge by default. I'm still debating whether to include that in the editor, and it may turn up in there as an option, but right now this is where this shows. We will also have some other menus in here, at least one. There'll be some extra properties coming in, but that's new functionality and I still have to implement that. So when we get to that point, I will do another video that shows how that's going to work. And that will hopefully leverage some conditional formatting parts of Power BI. But I'll talk more about that when it comes through. So one of the questions we had on the last video, and thank you to the person who asked it, was when does version 2 actually come out? And like most things in our industry, it's really one of those it depends type answers. I'm still working on moving some of the version 1 functionality into this new version 2. So most things are there now, but I'm doing some work on the data and signals panes in the debugging area just to make those tables better and more performant, because there were some issues in version 1 with big data sets that we're trying to sort out. So that's currently being rewritten. There's also the field mapping and template generation dialogues that still need to be done as well. So I'm hoping I'll have caught up with that, guess version 1 functionality by the end of January. And because I develop in my free time and have to find time to do it, hopefully the remaining new features that I'm looking to implement will be done hopefully by the end of February. It is subject to change, so it's going to depend on a lot of things, but that's what I'm aiming for at the moment. Once we're through to that stage, we'll open it up for beta testing for those that are keen to get their hands on it and hopefully give me some feedback on the quality. Because what I don't want to do is move this into app source before it's really ready. I mean, I can test this thing and I am testing it. I'm using it in current projects now and it's working well. There are some things to polish and I will work on those. But Obviously, there are going to be people that find things I can't, and I'm going to really value that feedback just because it's me doing this and I don't have a team of testers. So there'll be like a beta phase, much like there was with version 1 releases, but it'll be a little bit longer because I need people to really try it over their existing designs, try the new features, give me feedback, and then the goal is to try and get this into app source as soon as possible after that. So assuming the happy path, April, May, ideally, for it being an app source. But I'll try and keep you updated with things as I go, just in case anything major changes or, even goes better than we thought, could do. We don't know, hopefully. But hopefully that answers your question. So the short answer is not yet, but soon. But I wouldn't expect anything before the first quarter of the year. So I hope you can see a little bit more about what's happening with version 2, a little bit more about where we're going with functionality, how it's going to hopefully help you be more productive. And next time we will spend a bit of time focusing on changes to the JSON editing part of the visual, because that's actually been quite a lot of work to move it where I want it to go. And I'll be quite excited to show you those. So I hope this has been good, and I look forward to catching you again. And thanks as always for watching. Take care.